Hi there, this is Solitary Ronin from Solitary Ronin Films, and welcome to another double take. Today's double take focuses on Pere Portabella, and we're going to look at two of his films, The Silence Before Bach from 2007 and Mudanza from 2008. This is a relatively new second run Blu-ray release. It is multi-region. It has a booklet with a couple of essays which are very useful. As far as extras, we just have an interview with Portabella on a Catalan TV show called Sala 33, where he talks about both films, which again is very informative. One of these films, The Silence Before Bach, is 102 minutes. The other film, Mudanza, is 20 minutes. Pere Portabella made the amazing Vampir Cuadecuc, which is also in second run, which I did a random review of a while ago, which is one of the most amazing, strange films you'll ever see. It's a version of Dracula made on the set of another version of Dracula. It's experimental and strange and weird, but it might be one of the best versions of Dracula I've ever seen. And it also has some amazing points about cinema itself. It's one of those films that shouldn't work, but somehow, depending on what mood you're in, really works on an amazing level, or is complete twaddle. Go check out that video, or just go check out Vampir Cuadecuc. So let's start with The Silence Before Bach, which isn't a biopic about Bach. It's more a study of the importance of his music and kind of stories and anecdotes about his music. It reminds me a lot of the Francois Gerard film 32 Short Films about Glenn Gould, the famous pianist who did a lot of Bach pieces. And that is one of the greatest films about trying to create a portrait of an artist. This isn't that kind of film, but the fragmented nature, its episodic, kind of reminded me of 32 Short Films by Glenn Gould. It's not as good as the 32 Short Films by Glenn Gould, which I really should do a separate video on, because it is an amazing piece of work. So this one opens with like an empty room, and there's one of those programmed pianos that plays a tune without anybody playing on it, and it moves by itself around the room. We then have a blind piano tuner coming in and tuning a piano with some Bach. I should say, obviously, the soundtrack is amazing because it's Bach. Also, I'm more of a Mach person, which is a mix of Bach and Mozart, just lines upon lines, but that's a different story. We have kind of flashbacks to Bach playing with his son. We have a Bach impersonator doing a tour of Leipzig, where Bach had his kind of more productive period in the 1720 odd to 1750. We have the famous anecdote about Mendelssohn's butcher. Mendelssohn came a bit once Bach had died, and Bach's music was never really found or written down anywhere until it was kind of discovered 50 years after his death. And there's the story of Mendelssohn's butcher wrapping meat in some of the music of Bach, and Mendelssohn discovering St. Matthew's Passion, for example. I mean, again, I don't know how accurate that is or whether it's just anecdotal, but we see that story. And so you have bits of the film where people are in costume. You have modern day. There's an amazing scene with lots of cellists on a train. But Portabella being Portabella, we see them getting off the train and humping all their cellos up the stairs. Again, if you've seen Vampire Cuadecuc, obviously this is 2007, so he's an older man, but there's still some of that frustration watching it, mixed with just jaw-dropping wonder. And again, there's shots in it and moments in the film that are quite beautiful, and then there's shots that are somewhat frustrating as well. It is a mixed bag just by its very nature. There's a variety of Bach pieces played on different instruments. There's harpsichord, there's church organ, oboe, piano, harpsichord. Obviously it goes into Bach's relationship with God and the importance of kind of religion to Bach, and you know how Bach to some people is very religious, you know, music. There's little side avenues and side roads. You know, there's a character who believes music can save people, and he's in a bookshop, and somebody gives him a book which was written by one of the survivors at Auschwitz, who was a conductor for the musicians at Auschwitz. So for example, it's mentioned that the orchestra was asked to play Christmas carols by the commandant to the sick women in the camp hospital, and the women were like crying and shouting back, "Just let us die in peace." So there's all these little nooks and crannies that the film goes down. Again, it's not a film specifically about Bach the person, it's about Bach the music. Again, it's not completely successful, but it is an interesting film, like the 3 films by Portabella that I've seen so far. There are times where the music's playing. Again, you'll have a shot just of like the sheet music that goes through one of those automatic pianos. There are a name for them, but I can't think of it right now. And it's almost hypnotic as you just see the dots going round the paper. There's like shots of just the sheet music while there's like a choir singing. So at times it's really hypnotic. There's a beautiful scene where somebody's playing a piano and a dressage horse is moving along with the music. So it's an interesting film. It's at times visually really interesting and really sumptuous. It has something to say about the power of music and why we're still listening to Bach 300 years later. Is it an amazing film? Is it a great film? Perhaps not. It's not on the level of strangeness and weirdness of Vampire Cuadecuc, but it's certainly well worth checking out. But bizarrely for me, the better film is Mudanza, which I think is roughly translated in Spanish as moving. So it's a perfect example of a film. Again, it's only 20 minutes long. feels like 10. But it's a perfect example of a film that you watch and you say, okay, there's something there. There's something interesting about that. And then you read about why it was made and what the subtext of the film is. So you watch it again and you go, okay, it feels a little bit more weighty. But again, is that just, the knowledge you had or that you found out about, as opposed to just seeing the film blind? So the film, it's called Moving, essentially, or roughly. So it is a house being emptied of its contents. There are paintings and works of art. We see them being taped up, covered in bubble wrap, put into boxes. There's furniture. There is a grand piano who 2 removal guys put on a trolley, lift it onto its side, take the legs off, strap it in, and then slowly move it round rooms and corridors and out the building. And then the house is empty and Portabella starts doing really slow tracking shots, really slow dolly shots into fireplaces. And there's one where he starts in a corridor, really slow, deliberate dolly into a stairwell. Again, if this was Paranormal Activity 10, you would expect a jump scare. But of course, a jump scare never happens. You just have this hypnotic dolly. And then we kind of come back to another dolly and we're in what you guess is like a storage facility or a storage place. And again, we have slow tracking shots, and then it's all the items wrapped in their bubble wrap in boxes. And the final shot of the film is essentially a headboard or a bedstead in bubble wrap. And that's the end of the film. Now, for me, watching it, you did get a sense of your mortality. Because when we die, especially, for example, if you're a solitary Ronin, if you die, your belongings are either just going to get binned or sat in a place in storage gathering dust. I know in the film community a little while ago, I think Man v Film was talking about, what's actually going to happen to our collections when we die. And that kind of, because it's so slow, it gives you time to think about what you're watching, think about things. And I was really struck by that feeling of, when we die, our houses, our flats, places where we live are just going to be emptied, and they become empty rooms, and all the time you've spent in those rooms, all the life that those rooms have seen will now be clean and empty. All your possessions will be somewhere else, wrapped up in storage. So that was my first feelings when I watched the film the first time. But then I read about the film, and this was the house of Federico Garcia Lorca, who was a Spanish poet, who I'm completely ignorant of, I've never heard of. But he was one of at least 100,000 people who disappeared under the Franco regime in Spain. So Portabella, got into trouble under Franco's regime. All of his films are generally got a little bit of a political slant to them. So this was more about, here's a house that had an artist in it, a poet who was disappeared. His body has still never been found. So it's about, not willingly moving house, to somewhere else. It's being killed and disappeared, essentially. And the emptying of that house and his possessions put into storage. Now, as far as I'm aware, obviously those possessions and the paintings and stuff are in a museum somewhere, because he's a famous Spanish poet. But again, and then watching the film, you put on the more idea of, this is actually somebody who was killed, this is somebody who disappeared without trace, and this is his house being emptied of possessions. So that's just a slightly different feeling you get watching it the second time. But again, for me, the first time you still had, or it still gave me some feelings of, this is what's going to happen to where I live when I die. So it's a really interesting film. Again, with Vampire Cuadecuc, you could watch it and just go, this is pretentious twaddle. And that's a perfectly valid response to it. But they are both interesting films. Again, second run always produce these interesting releases. Some of them are obviously better than others. Again, I would say Vampire Cuadecuc is an amazing film, even though, again, I can perfectly understand if somebody watched it and went, that's terrible. I get that. And these two, The Silence Before Bach and Mudanza, or as somebody suggested, The Silence After Lorca, they could have called it. They're certainly interesting and thought-provoking films. So thanks very much for watching another ridiculously mainstream video. And you can let me know if you've seen The Silence Before Bach or Modanza and what you thought of them. And hopefully you'll join me again for more double take videos. This is Solitude Ronan from Solitude Ronan Films, saying goodbye.